I'm Mary Ellen, and I'm one of the co-creators of the I Street Garden with Teresa.
Yahoo!
I guess I'll just introduce my background within sort of basketry or the waddle making. When I lived in Virginia, I did a 2-year agriculture program, and there was a really wonderful community of women who met on Wednesdays to make baskets. And that was sort of my introduction, was more formal basketry, where we worked with mostly purchased materials, primarily ash that was like already nice and ready for you, but we also did some work with natural materials. So we used willow, we also used cuttings from prunings from apple trees and stuff like this. And mostly we made smaller items, nothing like we'll be doing today. So that's sort of my background. And this creation that is the potato tower was just a extension of my basket making sort of skill set. And yeah, the waddle is something that I had never really heard of until very recently. But Anne has more of a background with the waddle and sort of the historical aspect of how the waddle has been used. And I actually made a waddle this last week for a client, which was like very, very random. And so yeah, so we'll be making technically a waddle today, but it's also just like a natural woven fence. You want to think about it in that way.
That's exactly what it is. So my name is Anne. I'm going to step closer so you can hear me. I do not have a loud voice. While I work as a librarian, I also have a degree in history, and I am specifically interested in history of daily life, especially medieval housekeeping. And so I talk about all aspects of medieval life. During normal times, we do a history presentation at the Three Barons Renaissance Fair, and I'm in the house, and I talk about how the house was built. And the style of the house was called, the building style was called Waddle and Daub, or half timbering. So you can see where these timbers frame up the building. In between those, where it's white, is actually wattle. So instead of being in a circle like the potato bin there, it's done flat, and it's done within the frame of the building. So you have holes, and then you have grooves at the top. You put the end of a stick, bigger stick, into a hole, slide it in the grooves, get it in place, and then you take skinny ones and you weave in and out. After that, you plaster it with a mixture of clayish mud and straw. The more straw you get in, the better your R value for insulation. Sorry, I did not look up the R value, but it's like X number per inch of thickness, and I can look that up and email it to Terry so she can add that on to the notes for the video. And so it's a natural building material. It can be broken down. It's all natural. It's stuff that you would probably collect locally. It's actually been in use for 6,000 years or more. It goes back Bronze Age, Iron Age. By the Middle Ages, land was managed, and that means the trees were managed. Sorry, I'm kind of launching right into this from my introduction. But I'll give the background and some of the uses that they did, and then we'll go on. So everything was managed, so you would coppice your trees so that you would be more likely to get straight sticks. And they mostly used, this is England, where most of my knowledge comes from, they would mostly use hazel and willow. But you can actually use anything. And so I've made some examples of it, and I've just used whatever I could get my hands on. And it'll all work. And so they would make their buildings out of it. You'd have a professional carpenter frame it up with the real wood, which was expensive. And then you'd use your coppices, which you would plan for ahead of time. They would plan to use the woods that grew anywhere up to 75 years in advance. So if you were growing a long, straight, tall tree, a ship mast, you'd have to let that grow for a long time. On the other hand, you could coppice stuff like this, and it'd be easily available.
Does everyone know what coppicing is?
Okay,
So just to explain,
you know more than I do.
No, there's two types of ways to essentially get this diameter stick, twig, whatever we want to call it. Basically, one method is called coppicing, and that's when you have a willow, for example, or hazel, and you cut at the base or very close to the ground, and then from that it re-sprouts. But instead of having one, it's like Medusa, and it sprouts a bunch of different sort of runners. And then pollarding, on the other hand, they've both been used traditionally and in agriculture for a very long time. Pollarding is simply take these crabapple trees, for example. If we just chopped it off at the top, kind of like you see actually the electrical companies do, if you've ever seen a tree, that's pollarding. So they basically cut it off, and then from that it sprouts and regrows. And that can be used at any height above the ground, and traditionally has been used for fodder for animals. So in certain types of like silvopasture or mixed farming with animals and forestry, you would do a pollarding, and then that would grow vegetation, and the animals could naturally reach it because you would cut it at a height for them. So those are kind of the two differences with those, but that's what coppicing is.
Yeah, and I know the terms, but I have not done that or had any real experience with it.
Yeah, and we've done it on accident at the orchard where all this material is from, because the trees have been cut continually to, we're not trying to grow willow intentionally, but it's been happening. I think maybe we should start doing it intentionally for basket making, but basically they've been coppicing it year after year to make room for the apple trees and the cherry trees and everything else in that area. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
So it's a difference in height is the word. So the
Yep.
coppicing is low. And then
Pollarding, and there's
pollarding.
like some other variations too, but those are sort of the main two.
Okay.
And I think they're probably both like British English, like older English terms, because they're primarily, I think a lot of this skill set does come from England.
Yeah, but it was used all over Europe. I mean, the Waddle and Daub style of building, it ended up being called Tudor style, which is after the Tudor dynasty,
Right.
but it was used everywhere because the materials were easily available everywhere. England had famously, sorry, I'm going to go off on this a little, but it had very clayey soil, and so they're the ones who had to start drawing their plows with horses once they got to a certain point with the horse collar development, and they needed a different kind of plow. You know all this, I'm sure. But a different kind of plow, and what they did with their plowing was basically, because England was also wet, there was some version of what we would call, when you're on a hillside and you want to keep the water or let it go down, they would angle their plow according to what they needed to, according to the seasons. None of this stuff is new, but there's no straight line of descension on any of this. Sorry. So anyway, back to Waddle. They did use it as part of house construction, but they also used it to build fences where they would just put a thicker stick into the ground or a branch and then weave around it with something finer. And they also built something called hurdles, which is something that you just adapt the fence to something that is portable. So you can weave something that you can say, I need to pen in the baby goats, and I'm going to move these over here and to make a temporary pen, or a toddler, for a playpen. Or you need shade for your plants for this time period because you're hardening them off, but then you can move it somewhere else and use it for another reason.
Is that where the history of hurdling comes from?
Yes, because you could jump over some of them. Or your lambs could eventually. Yes. All this stuff comes down. And they did things with the hurdles where they would make them and they would go forward and then go backwards and leave a stick here, so you could grasp them with your hands, lift them easily and move them. Very ergonomic. People didn't just discover ergonomics in the 1970s. It's been around for a while. Also with that, those two handholds there, you could bundle them together, tie them together, and put them on a wagon or the back of your horse and fasten it to the horses.
Or figure out on a bicycle trailer or something.
And transport things around wherever you needed to do that. So people were really smart about using natural materials for centuries. We wouldn't be here alive if people weren't smart about using natural materials. And all this stuff is renewable, and it looks really good in your garden.
Great. Well, I'm just going to interrupt for a moment. While we continue to talk, we can also do some work at the same time. So I'll just demonstrate the general method here. We got a variety of different weavers. So this is cherry. We have quite a bit of cherry where this material was collected. That is rootstock that has just gone crazy. So it's pretty intentional also to be removing it, which is great. It's also really beautiful because it's red versus the willow is a little bit more of a green color. And then we also collected some alder, which is kind of a brown red. And then Anne also, we decided to collect some cottonwood because that is so invasive here and prevalent, to see how it would do over time and see about using that as a weaver instead of some of the other things. So basically what we'll be doing, I have a couple extra set of pruners here, but we want to get the wood down to where there aren't any, and this is also, I will say, a matter of preference. Some people might perhaps leave these on depending on the project. But basically you'll clip all of the larger branches off, and then it strips pretty easily just by hand for getting the leaves off. So then we're essentially, you can even cut off a small amount at the top because it's not very strong at the top. So we're left with one of these, which will be our weavers. So I will give you guys each a little bit to kind of be doing, and you can either collect it in the buckets or just leave it on the ground and we'll collect it at the end.
It won't go to waste.
It won't go to waste.
Do you ever, are cherry leaves medicinal? Like, can you dehydrate them and make them like chips?
I don't know. It's a good question. It's worth looking into.
Stuff.
Yeah.
It's a great
I could
idea.
also look up the variety that this rootstock is. It could tell us a little bit more about how it can be used. But that's an excellent idea.
Yeah, I would think tea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's tasty.
The thickness of the branch, I've always used thinner ones, but mostly because that's what I could get my hands on. But yeah, there are all kinds of variations and varieties and ways to do all of this stuff, which is amazing. And it's all tied in. There's also ways of doing things with straw. It's a little different for thatching a roof, for example, which, by the way, the R value on that is phenomenal.
Another note is that generally, I guess this is also a matter of preference, but when I use these materials, I strip them right where I'm taking them from, so that kind of like the chop and drop agricultural method, so that the nutrients can go back into the soil. Unless they're like very large pieces, maybe I would take that to a compost pile. But it's also a way of making it easier to carry your weavers away from the spot. But we decided today to bring it here because we have a couple more hands to help with.
Well, and I think it's worth noting, especially within the permaculture community, and I'm sure with just any expert gardeners, or gardeners who just have a passion for it, is you just push the boundaries of what is possible. And we had a summer last summer that was just amazingly hot and dry, and people were growing cucumbers outside and successfully growing watermelons and corn and things that just 10 years ago wouldn't have been thought possible except in a greenhouse. And so it's really a great idea to experiment in your own space. You can create microclimates which can bump up the temperatures a little bit more. And then the beautiful thing about the Anchor Garden community is, we're sharing what our successes and our I won't even call them failures because they're priceless in what you learn from it. And our experiments, the results of our experiments, sharing that so that we can grow as a community just that much.
What are these ones?
These are willow. So I brought some willow just so we could start stripping some of the willow, because it's kind of just nice to alternate the colors. And the willow is actually a little bit easier to strip.
There is actually a dance called Strip the Willow. So you know people were doing this for a long time.
Did you trim these this morning, or how long have you?
Yes, you can. Willow is it's a really great material to weave with because it's one of the only materials that you can harvest in advance and simply re-wet when you're wanting to weave.
And willow will like you could plant that and it'll grow.
Yeah, and
You
that's
could have
another thing to note is that willow grows like crazy. So if we chose to use our uprights with willow, the structure would come alive within a couple of years, likely.
create your own living fence.
And you can definitely do that if that's what you're wanting to, but it's also a caveat if you would not like your fence to.
Well, and willow is moose food. So if you do make a living willow fence, you are potentially attracting moose
Right.
to an area that you might want to be keeping them out of. Now, I would think cherry leaves are moose food.
Probably. I'm sure
yeah.
it's very tasty.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit sweet.
So you go down to the coastal trail near the Lynn Airy Park. Bring a bucket and bring a hand truck. This is heavy stuff. Bring a friend. More than one if you need more than one bucket, but get a little bit to start with. So you have to kind of go across, I think it's private property, but not too much, down to the inlet, dig the stuff out. So again, like I said, we do the Renaissance Fair, and one of the people there builds an oven every year. So she has bricks that she puts together, and she mixes straw with the clay to chink the bricks and seal them together. And then at the end of the year, she takes it all apart, and the stuff just goes into the ground and biodegrades. But that's where she gets it. So
I've done. I've built 2 earth ovens with sand, clay from Healy, and straw fiber, and these are earth ovens. You know, the dome shape that you like pizza ovens.
yeah, that's exactly what she does.
Do they get up to
Oh yeah,
really high temps?
Yeah.
yeah, very high. So like your earth oven would cook a pizza in just
Like 5 minutes
or less.
Or less.
Yeah, yep.
She bakes bread, so it takes more than 5 minutes, but it works.
Probably less.
So all of these different skills, I just think it's just wonderful
Kind of invaluable. It just opens up.
Yeah.
and you appreciate when you go in to use your Instant Pot or your pressure cooker. I mean, you appreciate the fact that you have it, but it's good to know that there's other ways to do it, and sometimes that's the more fun thing.
Well, and like with this garden, with so many things, you can design with intention. What is it that you want? Do you want functionality? Do you want it to be a gate? But you can also design beauty.
Yes.
You can design, this is edible. You can make it a living. It could be a moose habitat. It could be design with intention and stack functions, which is a very permaculture principle. And I personally love designing with beauty and thinking about creating habitat for insects or birds or, wildlife. If you can draw wildlife kind of where you want them in your yard or homestead and not where you want them, then you're kind of working with nature.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go and get the material that we'll use to weave around, but you guys can continue for just a moment and then we'll get started on the project.
And I'm imagining that there's the possibility that after your sword class, you could come back and the materials will be here and you can continue the project if no one else is here. If you want to get more hands-on skills and see kind of the progress that was made while you were gone. And chances are we might still be here too. It's, hard to say, but just thought I'd throw that out to you because I think like the materials are going to be here while we're in the process of building this fence.
Well, excellent. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. So you won't miss out.
So one thing I do want to point out, one of the sources I looked at, and it's certainly been my own experience, you're going to need so much more of this stuff than you think you will need. And you've noticed that too. Yeah, it's one source I said get 5 times more than you think you need, and that's a good starting point.
Definitely.
Thank you.
We might not have enough for the project that we're working on, but it's also, we're just gonna get started on it today anyway. So as far as the uprights go that we weave around, no, you're good. You want it to generally be a material that won't break down super quickly. So we have quite a bit of alder and birch at the property, which are generally a little bit longer lasting from my understanding, so that's what we've chosen today. Our plan is to do a fence or a wattle fence that is about 10 inches high. So we'll want our uprights to be at least a foot, say, and then account for how much is going to go in the ground. I don't know how far we're going to get in the ground, so the first one I'm going to cut probably a little bit extra long, just to see. It's not the end of the world if you cut it short, because you can add in another one at the top if you need to.
You might want to.
And I'll demonstrate how to do that actually, maybe on the potato tower.
I was just going to suggest that maybe we want to do a slight point at the bottom.
Yeah,
okay.
That's definitely going to happen. So I'm going to cut it at a pretty sharp angle, and then the next one I'll cut this flat, so then the angle will be shared by the two in the middle, if that makes sense. And this is all just stuff you figure out after doing it once. Trial and error. Very nice to have a quite sharp saw for this, otherwise it can be a frustrating task. I'm gonna go, if you guys want to come over, you're welcome to. I'm gonna just start putting in these uprights where we're gonna do our fence, which is just gonna be along this little perennial area that is beside the greenhouse. We can bring weavers to strip that way if we want to.
Is that the pointy end there?
Yep.
Okay.
If you're worried about stability, you can also put rocks at the base and hammer them in. I don't think it should matter for this structure because it's not supporting anything, but that is an option. And then the other thing of note when spacing your uprights is that you want your weavers to go around at least 3 of the poles, essentially. So this is a pretty short one, and it would start here. So we want our third space to at least be around here, our third upright. I'm probably gonna do them fairly close, probably like about this. Feels right. Which is actually similar to what you see on the tower.
Some areas we have like pretty thick cardboard, so there may be a little bit more that you got to pound
Resistance.
through. Yeah.
That's probably.
And we have lots of rocks if we do need it.
You can see that it's still moving, which is okay. It doesn't need, it's better if it's like absolutely solid, but it really depends on your ground. These were not like super duper solid, and they're still doing okay. So if somebody would want to, feels comfortable using the saw, we could cut some more links that are similar. And we'll probably, in the interest of time, I think we'll stop it at some point, probably midway here, so we can actually do some weaving before people need to go. But here's this, and the uprights are right here.
You know what you can also do, what I've done is you could use a bucket to put the stick on top of and hold it, and then have it hang off the side.
To
Give you more stability, so it's not moving like that.
good try to simplify this.
And you have it hanging off the side. Yeah. Put the handle down. Here, yeah, and then we like there, and then I can help hold the one end so that it just gives you more resistance. So there we go.
Needed to be more on an angle, I guess. There we go.
Yeah, we might want a little bit more of an angle,
Okay.
but we could, I should have brought a large, do we have a large set of pruners here?
I can check in my car.
I think this one.
But you know, that was your first.
Yeah.
And each time you do it, you learn, okay.
Yeah, and pruners do work really well too for just making a point at the end.
Perfect.
Are willows native to here?
Yep. And another thing about willows that when you see a lot of willows growing, you know there's a lot of water. Same with cottonwood. So it's like if water is what you're looking for, you look to see what's growing there, and you can tell. Because there could be like an underground spring or something that, you know, when you're buying land or raw land or something. Is there a specific thickness that you're?
That we're going for.
Yeah.
This is probably the thinnest we'll go.
Okay.
It's still pretty strong because this is like very strong wood. But yeah, anywhere kind of in between here and here is what we would be shooting for.
It's gonna be
That's
so
enough of a
pretty.
point, or does it need to
Yeah,
be?
I think that looks great. And I'm a little bit maybe too much of a perfectionist, but I like to measure. I mean, it's not an exact measurement, but
Sure.
just so things stay relatively the same.
Very pleasing to the eye. Unless you want like an abstract art piece or something.
Sure. Right.
Have you ever done it in sections like this without doing the whole thing?
I haven't, but it can't be any different than doing anything else and adding it in as you go.
Right.
Yeah. And you always run out if you're doing a large.
Do you want some help, Liz, holding it?
Been really small.
I think I got it. I think there's
Okay.
enough weight on this end to keep it sturdy.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
Great.
If it's moving around a lot, that's, yeah.
So we want one side to be flat if possible.
Okay.
We just want to flatten out one of them.
We can scoot you in another direction so she can come around. Thicker it is, the more.
Harder it is, right?
And just another note is where you are sawing is kind of right at a knot, and that's probably a more tougher place to cut, you know, where there's a branch. So just for future, like pick in between.
The knots. Okay.
Yeah, just little less work.
You think this is too big to be a post or a link?
Is this too right
It
length?
might be too short.
This one might be short.
Okay.
But no, let's do it. Let's do a thick one.
Yeah, that thick one would be, I think, okay.
Okay, I'm just gonna cut it at an angle at the top here.
Perfect. Angle on one end, flat on the other. Good job. There's another one. Oops. I'm just going to walk around and see what everyone's up to.
I started out wearing gloves. Oh well. But this stuff is so easy to strip out. It's really nice. The willow is the easiest.
So that's willow. and
No,
then-
this is actually cottonwood or alder.
Cottonwood, I think.
Cottonwood. It's all sticky.
Oh, okay.
But the the willow is the easiest.
So so you guys brought 3 types today?
I just from
Cottonwood.
habit grabbed anything that was like approximately the right size.
That's great.
But we ended up, I know I cut cherry, cottonwood, willow, alder.
Great.
So all of that will be in there.
And I know that there was somebody had asked earlier in the week about the Mayday trees, the invasive Mayday trees. Like, I would think that anything that is of this, width and long enough could be a twine.
Yeah, it's important. It could be good to look up sort of the longevity of the material.
Okay.
I'm not sure about Mayday
Well,
or
and
even cotton
Mayday
wood.
is so invasive that you might just be like planting a forest of Mayday where, you know, your fence may become a bunch of Mayday trees.
Right?
Well, if you're there managing, you
True.
can control that.
Yeah.
I've seen things put out leaves. Certainly, I haven't seen it take root, but I've seen it put out leaves. All the stuff I've done has been temporary.
Woo! Dun da da!
I'm gonna take a go at putting the post in.
Oh, sure.
Sometimes you have to further cut it
Okay.
at the end so that it's more of
Jagged.
yeah, like a
Stabbable.
very, because this, like Teresa was saying, the fact that we have so much cardboard, so it's sometimes hard to pierce that layer.
And the reason the cardboard, we did lasagna gardening here, and we did a lot of like spent grain and produce on
Yeah,
top
and
of the
I was
grass,
just measuring using one of them,
Okay.
like that.
and a
Cool,
thick
nothing too fancy.
layer of
Good old
cardboard,
eyeball measure.
3 or more, so it can provide quite a barrier. Beautiful.
Bam.
Liz, whenever you're ready to switch to, you just say the word.
It's hard to do it with these small. I should have brought the larger pruners.
So those willow leaves, you know, you can make a tea out of. That's like your, that's where your aspirin comes from, willow bark, acetaminophen.
Slightly stoppier. We'll see.
Yeah. Just try, I mean, that could be a mulch. The willow could continue to grow, though, if you use it as a mulch. What else? What other uses? You can compost it.
Yeah.
It's your green.
Make little mini baskets
Absolutely. You could smoke. You could smoke. Can't you smoke it? Smoke fish. Cherry, like those cherry branches. Cherry smoked fish.
like it's hitting a rock. Wow, I think there's like 10 layers of cardboard right here.
Yep.
This one is really
Yep.
really
A thinner one.
I feel the earth.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on.
Woo!
Yahoo!
Lord, there's like 10 layers of cardboard here.
Mary Ellen has lost 5 pounds in front of us.
Alright. Well, I think we could go ahead and start just so you can get a feel for it, Sarah. And then it can be continued upon whenever people have time.
venti properties.
Yeah.
What about the other ones?
I've never. I know that they will last a while in a damp spot, but I'm not sure if they re-wet so easily. But it's
Okay.
worth trying.
So you trimmed these today? Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay, so right into it.
we did, but I also trimmed some for that basket like a week before and it still worked. So it does have a little bit of leeway.
Okay.
But we can get started. I don't know if Anne has a particular way of doing this, but I know how I did it might be slightly unusual as far as Waddle goes. The basic premise is that you always go out, you know, you're weaving around, and the next one will come over and it'll do the opposite. But in addition to that, I like to twine them together so it gives it a little bit more structure. So, for example, this one's on top here, which means that we want this one on top next.
Oh, I see.
Almost like a braid in a way.
Yeah,
In fact, one thing I ran into said if you've got really skinny ones, you can braid them together. Yeah.
and so it's a little bit tricky at the start because this doesn't have anything to pull on. So we're gonna do a slight cheat just to get started. So that one's on top, so this next round, this one's gonna be on top. But you can already see that we need to add another weaver here because this one is ending. So we're gonna go ahead and add an additional one. And I generally choose to add it so that it'll go on the inside. So I'm adding it just where this one was. And oh, sorry.
It's okay.
So that's just literally being doubled essentially. And then the next one, we're gonna have to add one right here as well. It's ideal to have them of different lengths because then you're not ending at the same place, which will just kind of eventually happen. So this one was here, we're gonna stick our weaver in with it and then try to braid them together. And this right now is gonna stick out, but once we have a little bit more structure, it can probably be tucked into the structure without being cut. We'll see that at a later point. So that one here. And then this one's gonna go.
So cool how quick it comes.
Yeah. So then that one's gonna end, and we're just gonna make sure we have another weaver. It's gonna go over like that. Yeah. So if you want to try, I know that was not the biggest introduction.
No, it's
But,
good. So would you want to do the whole base first before you started the second and third?
You mean like the continual whole piece?
Or would you
Generally,
build it
but
up?
today we're just gonna do it just this section and build this section up, and
Okay.
we'll kind of, it'll be an experiment to see how to continue with it looking continuous
Okay.
in the future.
I think it's going to be pretty much the same because you're already having, even with just this shorter section, you're still having to add more in. Everything I have done has been really, really short, so I've never had that issue. And then people bend it back around. And one of the things I heard is that with willow, if you go like this and kind of roll it back and forth, it becomes more fibrous and then
Can you show
bends
that again?
easily. You're kind of going like this, like you're wringing out a wet sock. And then it breaks down the fibers, but then they can bend around a corner better. I don't know if that's true with some of the other woods or not.
Yeah, I know. I watched a video on the hurdling, and that's what they do
Yeah,
for the hurdling.
for hurdles, they certainly do that because it's shorter and it comes to an end at some point.
Right.
start all over.
And why are you bending it back like that?
Just because we're ending it here.
Oh, okay.
So we can cut it off too if we prefer, but just to give it a little bit more structure so it's not just stopping there. A lot of it I feel like there's not really many rules other than, yeah, it's very intuitive, so it's sort of like whatever feels right or makes sense.
Well, and also you could do a much looser weave and see through it, you know, versus a tighter weave like your potato tower, which is holding material. So it's really designer's choice.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's also, each stick is different too. So if you've got a stick that bends this way, use it in a way that the bend is part of what you need,
Sure.
as opposed to trying to fight that.
Yeah.
So that's
hard
the thing
angle
with
to
natural materials all the time.
I know, to try to keep
And I think that's the thing with art too.
Yes. You use what you've got and
What
you
do
make
you
it
think,
work
Mary Ellen?
the way it wants to be used to some extent. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we just need another post to help it out in the beginning.
Another
So it
post
can-
like
so it can kind of be wedged in between the two. Never done something with such a sharp angle that wasn't circular.
uh-huh.
So it could be, you could try to figure that out. That looks pretty good. Could be twisted around.
Just a couple extra twists there.
Yeah. And I think we could, I mean, another alternative here is to start with like a pretty flexible, I don't know how flexible this is going to be, but
Oh, I see. You're
pre-bending.
yeah.
And the way that they wring it out, it's a little bit easier to do when it's stuck to something. But he kind of like twist if this was being held in place until it turns into rope, essentially. It's
Yeah,
like very interesting.
That's right. That's exactly what they were saying.
So we could potentially start
Ah.
Uh-huh.
like this.
Yeah.
Collective aha.
It's still sort of tricky.
Yeah. I'll hold this. You wrestle with that.
So it might break, but even that is okay. Like it's broken, but it's not torn apart here.
Right. It should still hold.
Metaphor for life.
And I think when you start to add on, you could do the same thing where you start with either the middle or with the skinny end and weave it around.
And it just builds its own unique character, which adds to the beauty.
There's a rhythm to it, but each one is unique at the same time, and it just works really nicely that way. And maybe just taking shorter, skinnier ones and kind of seeing if those would wrap around
Better.
and
I think what we might need
lash
to
it
do
a little.
is we could either add posts on either side. It's mostly these two that are kind of an issue. So we could go ahead and try to add 2 more uprights to weave around. So basically one here and here, and see if that helps give us a little bit more structure too. Might just do that really quickly. Some of these little ones.
Are we saying that that's going to be there permanently?
Possibly.
Okay.
Kind of an experiment with,
Sure.
I think mostly these structures were probably made for straight lines, which much of our garden is not straight lines. So it's just figuring out how it can be adapted
Sure.
to this situation.
Well, and even if this is one technique, and if we create new techniques, we can show the evolution as we learn.
And honestly, none of this is hard, but there is a trick to it, and practice is going to make a difference. in every step of it. But the basic idea is really straightforward.
Boy, that's really come around that bend really beautifully.
Right here.
Yeah.
Once it's started, it goes around turns easily, so that could be something of note. Starting on a curve is a little bit harder, than weaving around a curve.
Ooh.
Yeah, so it seems like this method could potentially work for our system here, because it's providing sort of more options from the beginning to be held against. So what's good, just to note, if you want to try it.
Yeah, how do you weave in a new stick?
So this one I just added right here. We want to do first. And then I think this one can get this one added in. Yeah, so Sarah actually has her own method, which is really great, of pre-creating the twining. Pre-twisting.
Ah,
Which
good
is working really well.
job. You natural.
Yeah, and you don't have to ever start at the beginning. Like you can start at this side, or you can go the opposite way, so that the thicknesses are always differing.
And I wasn't sure that I was going to like the colors of the wood together, but oh my gosh, it's gorgeous.
And it does kind of turn into a darker shade over time.
Yeah. So when you need it to bend, yeah, you're twisting it in.
I want that to be.
Mary Ellen, what would you suggest? Well, she's got this frisky willow.
You know, I'm almost wondering, have you ever done like with baskets, like this method where you would go in the bottom like this, and so that could support, and then you weave around it. Do you know what I'm
So you're
talking?
adding another,
Yeah, so it's like the stick, but you don't have to use a thicker stick,
yeah,
and then you could weave like that
sure. It's worth a shot to see
just to get it tight.
how it affects the structure too.
You just have to
And then,
bend it.
so this one is poking out the front here, which it'll give a little bit more structure if it's always on the inside, basically. So we can force it to go in there. It'll be a little bit more stable. There we go. It also hides it, so you don't have to do as much cutting afterwards.
Woo!
That one I stripped just to show that you can strip it
Oh,
and do different colors in that way. The willow strips really easily. I don't know about some of the other woods.
Birch is really a pain. You have to clip it almost
Yeah.
all the way. Yeah.
And what I've noticed is that you can start it someplace and start winding it, and then if you got an end that's poking out, you can just kind of scooch it, the whole stick, you know, down an inch or two or whatever you need.
And just continually weave this in or that in with the next one.
So, Mary Ellen, what would be your advice for this corner where you know the inside branches want to like?
Yeah, I think this is going to have to go on the outside.
I think that's perhaps how the twining helps, because you're like wrapping it around another branch, so it's almost as if there were another upright in this position, because you're twining it, it's crisscrossing at that spot.
Okay.
So then it's wrapping around the branch.
Sure.
But it could also, I mean, an alternative would be to put more uprights in this situation.
Yeah.
So there's kind of different ways of doing it.
And like I mentioned, all the stuff I've done has been really short, so I've got them closer together.
Right.
And I'm using thinner sticks because everything is so short.
Right.
And so it's just always going in, out, and then back around.
Right.
And
Do you typically start with the bigger guys on the bottom? Or does it really matter?
Doesn't matter.
Or does it
I
kind of
think I
depend
kind
on
of
the
vary it.
consistency you want?
We could weave some the opposite direction, yeah,
Yeah.
like that, to give it a little bit more variance.
this one I'm trying to just go around the corner itself.
I actually like a low fence in that if you were going to utilize and plant flowers, you would see them. You were saying you wanted like a 10-inch high.
That was sort of at least a little bit higher than this, perhaps. But this is looking good already.
It really is. And then we could like trim some of the higher posts.
The post will definitely. That's kind of the last step is trimming the post.
Okay.
Once you're happy with the height and how it looks, you can just trim them all off to be
Great.
equal. If you want it to be equal height, or it could be
Sure.
varying depending on what it needs for. Yeah, so that's looking really good, and as you can see that Sarah is sort of filling in with some smaller diameter where there's a little bit of space. So it's kind of just as you go, seeing how it progresses and being flexible and just rolling with it. That's the part that I think is really fun about it, is it's like just an artistic expression in a different way.
And
It's never like perfect or
it's actually
very
really
organic and
yeah, and it makes you appreciate the organic because it's like you step away from it and you see the beauty that's coming out, you know, in its imperfections or its what's the opposite of uniform? In its difference. Well, it has its own beauty.
It's not really a braid, but it's a little bit that direction. Anyway, I was thinking that maybe if we braided a few skinny ones together and then needed to pin in some of those, you could work on it so it might pin it in.
And is that the willow that bends like
This
that?
must be the willow because the birch is snapping much easier. Stuff to learn. Stuff for us to all learn. And I think this is definitely the willow.
So you're breaking down the fibers.
Yeah, because it's bending and twisting. They use the willow for so many different things. They're so long.
Ooh, what's that?
this is this is some of the willow bark, and I know that people do weave with this.
Right.
So you can flatten it out, and then if you get a lot of it, make different structures,
Oh my
smaller baskets with it.
God. And it's got to be strong, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty strong, and I think it dries pretty solidly.
And if you're weaving it, you're just making it that much stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's also the source of my pain reliever of choice.
Yeah. The bark.
Aspirin. Well, I take commercial aspirin, so I know the dosage amount.
Yeah.
But I know that willow bark is the source, the original source for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be
You
interesting.
could
I'm
chew on it.
not
what
sure
works for
so
me.
much about how to use it medicinally, but it definitely is worth looking into.
A friend of mine does it. She gets it's the innermost bark and she pounds it.
Like
and
the
I helped her.
cambium, basically like this.
Yeah, I believe so. And she pounds it, and she had me do a little taste test on it. I know what aspirin tastes like,
And
so
it
when she
tastes
gets
really
there, I can taste it. It's just like the commercial aspirin. The only question I have with natural remedies, I don't doubt that they work, and they often work super well because aspirin, like I said, my pain reliever of choice. But the question is sometimes the dosage
Right.
and making sure you get the correct dosage on the correct item.
kind of hard to get the inner bark, but it's very strong. Well, I think we could sort of end here, at least as far as the video portion goes.
Sounds good.
Yeah, this is basically it, and you can just continue on. You can stop the project and continue a different day. Right now we only did a section, so hopefully we will continue in the future with some more sections down the line.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Woo! Thanks, Mary Ellen.
Thank you, Anne.
Have
Appreciate
fun
your
with this
time.
stuff. Take it a different direction. I
Yeah.
would just really encourage experimentation.
Yeah, for sure.
It really is just the border around this bed is like really making this bed pop and beautify it. Okay. Bye.